Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we explore a real-world issue and look for solutions. We also feature people who chart courses that aren't always mapped. Today, that leader is Ethan Casson. He went from a cold call that landed him an internship with a sports team to a title held by only 30 people in the entire world. He's CEO of the NBA's Minnesota Timberwolves and WNBA's Lynx. We'll dive into the topic of what it means to win and how to navigate scarcity. He's here for the case file I call Ownership Rules. Ethan, according to ProSportsPulse.com, the NBA has more fans than all of the United States' other sports leagues combined. Yet some people think of the NBA as a bunch of rich athletes and owners who aren't really in touch with the common fan. You call your team a community asset. Define that for us.
I think too often, maybe narratives that are written around athletes, teams, leagues, sometimes miss kind of what's happening on the ground. And what makes these types of conversations so important is we can talk about the things that are happening on the ground and maybe reframe maybe a narrative that might exist. Let's start with kind of the first piece, which is the globalization of basketball. And no other league has had that level of success. This is truly a global game. This is a game that is being broadcast to over 200 to 250 countries around the globe. This is a league that's participating in international games, exhibition games, regular season games in different parts of the world. As you may have followed, we played in Abu Dhabi this past fall. Again, from our point of view, to continue to make sure that not only is Minnesota being represented on the global stage, but there's ways in which we can showcase our players in a different capacity. So spot on, this is a league that's not only taking over the globalization of it, but continuing to evolve and want to expand that strategy. Relative to the players and why I oftentimes describe the Timberwolves and Lynx organization and any sports team as a community asset is because on the court, we spend so much time focusing on, did we win last night? Did we lose, right? What kind of season are we going to have? What are we going to do at the quarterback position? What are we going to do with free agency? I mean, depending on what league and sport you follow. First and foremost, the team is and will always be about the fans, the engagement with the fans. We wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have this level of success and sustainability without those folks who look at anything in their lives that they might see different than others, but the one thing they see the same is their local sports team. I always talk about this as it's the ultimate community campfire. And we're the ones that are bringing, fans that campfire. So this is going to be and will always be about fans, fan engagement, fan experience.
Even when the players change.
Exactly. And in fact, even more so when the players change, that we still have this common thing that brings us together. As far as a community asset, I describe it as a community asset because although valuations and what these teams cost and how much is written about future television contracts, future initiatives that are taking place in each and every one of these leagues. This is about the community in which we reside. I always talk about serving the communities in which we work, live, and play. Our mission inside the Timberwolves and Lynx organization is to elevate lives through the power of basketball. Well, elevating lives means much more than what are we doing every night we play at Target Center. Elevating lives means what are we doing inside the communities in which we work, live, and play. And a community asset means we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to listen. We have a responsibility to engage. We have a responsibility to use our platform to help in maybe other areas that those communities might not be getting that help. And at times, it can be the tiniest of things. And we can talk about maybe what some of those moments are, certainly in our community, where we've got to take a more leadership stand. So this will always be a community asset serving the community.
In January 2024, the team received the NBA's Inclusion Leadership Award. Now, when we think about social issues and professional sports teams getting involved, we've had it kind of a mixed bag of results there. Sometimes individual players really shine brightly. Sometimes they fall flat on their faces. And sometimes the teams get credit for commenting or get bashed for not commenting. So how do you make a decision as the CEO of the Timberwolves and the Lynx, these discussions with your players, with the coaching staff, to actually get involved? Because I know you have some wins when it comes to social impact in some areas that people might not expect.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to try to unpack, right? Because whether it's things that are happening in real time, they might be current events related, things that are happening that might involve something at a much broader and bigger and more important scale. Too often we want to, and you can appreciate this more than anybody, we want to politicize everything. And when we politicize everything, we create basically this tribalism kind of way in which we go about it, meaning like, I just think this way, therefore this is what I believe. Oh, I think this way, therefore this is what I believe. And when you're a sports team, I said a little bit earlier, we are the community campfire that brings people together. And ironically, in this current state, at times we might take a position on something that might not bring everybody together or might have people see it maybe a little bit differently. So we're really intentional with when we use that platform and when we want to talk about something. We don't want it to be about politics. We don't want it to be about left versus right. We don't want to even make it about right versus wrong. Going back to the mission of elevating lives through the power of basketball, that's the filter that we use. Does a decision we're about to make with a program, an initiative, a statement, a monetary contribution, getting involved in a discussion that might not necessarily resonate with everybody, if we believe it's elevating lives and it's through the power of basketball, that's where we land on the decision to do it. If we feel internally with leadership, with ownership, with our players, inside the locker room, with our coaches in front office, that this doesn't quite fit who we are, or maybe this doesn't make sense for us at that particular time, that's the way we go about the decision making. And it's really, really hard because, as you can imagine, there are a lot of things that people want us to weigh in on. There are a lot of things that our staff wants us to weigh in on. If you think of what's happening in and around topics that are legislative, if you're thinking of things that are talking about people's rights to vote, a woman's right, we are in a very, very challenging window of time, and we've just got to be intentional with what we decide to go and do. And leading to that, I think we really gravitated years ago during the last election around voting. And we just looked at that as could be politicized. We never looked at it as such. We just looked at it as we all have this right to vote. Can we get more involved? Can we get more involved educating people? Can we get more involved in having people really understand the power of what a singular vote means? And then can we look at communities that might not understand, have the resources, have the education, have the experience to go and participate in that incredible gift that we're allowed? And that's where the origin of Pack the Vote came to fruition. And Pack the Vote is now evolved into a 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. And as you referenced, this NBA 2023-24 Inclusion Leadership Award, which was awarded to us by the NBA and our peers, it was really the Pack the Vote initiative from 2020 leading all the way up to 2024 when we were in partnership with the NBA Social Justice Coalition, when we were in partnership with Restore the Vote and the Restore the Vote initiative around taking Minnesotans, 50,000 by the way, that were either incarcerated or out on parole, and working with legislators to create a law that allows them the rights to vote. We just believed wholeheartedly that they deserve that right.
It's a unique area, a unique space or a group of people that you wanted to re-empower.
Yes.
I am a big believer in one person, one vote and the power of the vote. And more people, previously incarcerated or not, should be voting. So I'm guessing there were some interesting discussions inside your walls when you decided on this particular audience and to help them get re-empowered.
Absolutely. And I think what it came back to was this wasn't about who you vote for. And I think that's a big point of differentiation.
Very big.
Right? This wasn't about, well, you know, the NBA is, or the NBA generally represents, or the NBA, you know what I mean? This wasn't even trying to take a slant on it, where, again, going back to people looking at it and going, well, that's not how I feel, or I don't believe the team should be weighing in on that. This was simply about what you just said, which is the power of a vote, and that we have that power. And yes, there is a huge disparity under-resourced communities not having the tools necessary to go about what we're talking about. So we wanted to lean into that disparity, but that wasn't excluding the message in general. Pack the Vote is about you deciding for you, wherever you live, what's important and understanding why it's important. And I think as you start to unpack that a little bit, I think we think of the general election as the thing that everybody follows, but are we really understanding the power of a school board?
So much happens at the local level, and
Exactly.
people don't understand that. And sadly, across curricula in our country, in the United States, civics and just basic government isn't being taught, or it's getting the short shrift. And that makes me personally sad.
Yeah.
I was a political science major in college. I'm a big lover of just government. And I'm really, really proud, as you know, you're my home team, the Timberwolves and the Lynx, that this is something you chose to do. And my guess is you'll keep an eye on this right to vote, and how are other ways you might weigh in?
Years and years ago, we're the first professional sports team to turn the day of voting into a holiday.
That's terrific.
We call it, pack days on versus pack days off. So when people have the day off for, let's call it Martin Luther King Day, we look at that as a day on. So our organizations, that it might be a day off, but we look at it as what are we doing to represent PAC being involved in the community on a day on. And so we look at all of these things through that lens. It's been successful because we know what we're doing matters. It's meaningful. We always challenge ourselves. Is this something we feel comfortable going and getting involved in? And how is this going to get politicized? And if we can lean back on who we are as an organization, as long as we can be consistent with that, I'll be really, really proud. And I'm very proud of the staff and so many of the other areas that have weighed in and around this. I mean, Karl Anthony Towns is part of the Social Justice Coalition and a very active member. If you go back to the pandemic and the game in which was postponed, I think the Bucks were playing, if I recall, they just decided they weren't going to play that day. And what came out of it was the NBA Foundation. And the NBA Foundation is all about serving people from the ages of 18 to 24 around career development, primarily people of color, but in general. How do we get the resources inside of all 30 NBA communities to empower these folks to find a career and find a career path? Every owner made a commitment during that window of time to pledge $1 million times 30 markets for 10 years. So a $300 million contribution came out of the bubble when two teams decided, you know what, we have to say something, we have to do something. And most of the time, one of the things we oftentimes talk about, this has to be an actions over words kind of approach.
And talk about the power of one team or two teams.
Right.
Such power. It gives me chills as you share that backstory. Speaking of these 30 teams, you have such a prize-winning job, being the CEO of these two, the men and women's teams, but in one market. That's pretty incredible. And as you described, the 250 countries or so where basketball is popular and these NBA games are televised and there are so many other leagues around the world. Do you pinch yourself some days? I mean, when you say you tried for a while with that cold call, tell us about that backstory.
Yeah, the cold call is what oftentimes people love to ask me about because it seems so turnkey. The story really began much earlier than that, probably high school and college. I was fortunate enough to play basketball at a small college. I remember reading something about, I could get a degree in sport management. And I thought, that's really interesting. So you're saying there's a business side of sport. And I really gravitated toward that. And I thought, okay, as a first generation of my family to go to college, a twin brother, a younger brother, an older sister, all of us that went off to college. It was so important for my parents my mom was a teacher's aide, my dad a janitor for a significant period of time, to encourage us to go think as big as we could think and do something you're passionate about doing. And for me, it was about the game of basketball. It was about this profession. So I did 6 internships by the time I was 22. The cold call is funny because it took me 2 years of cold calling every single team alphabetically.
Wow.
Alphabetically.
And the Timberwolves were T.
I was on M. I was
Okay.
doing exactly. It would have been T if I was just doing the names. I was on the letter M. And it was a February night in 1999, and the HR woman picked up the phone. And I had just spent 2 years faxing my resume and leaving voice messages to every team in every league, by the way, and never got a call back. And so when I got a live person on the phone, I would not let this woman get off until she allowed me the chance. You ready for this?
Yeah.
To pay my way out to Minneapolis. I've never been here. To a job that didn't exist. She said, I'm just going to warn you. It's clear you're not going to get off this phone. I'm just going to warn you. There is no job. I got it. I flew out. I met with everybody throughout the day. And by the end of the day, I just wanted to create an impression. I wanted people to sit across from me and hear the enthusiasm and the passion. And honestly, I wanted them to sense this guy's kind of crazy.
Yeah, a little bit of a nut.
Yeah, like this just doesn't even make any sense. And one of the people that you know very, very well, Chris Wright, was the team president at the time. And I was fortunate enough to get like 30 minutes with Chris at the end of my informational visit. And I do believe, like very quickly, this person's different.
There's something here.
Yeah. And I don't mean like this is a raw talent that we have to go and cultivate. I was 23, 24 years old. I think it was, if somebody wants something this bad and are willing and continue to do this just for something that didn't exist, what would he do if this did exist? So by the time I got done the interview, I basically got a glorified, let's call it internship meets entry-level type position. I sold a handful of things that I owned that were worth a couple bucks, a one-way ticket back out to Minneapolis. And in 1999, I started off that cold call as an employee of the Minnesota Timberwolves organization.
That is just an epic story. That is epic, and that is where dreaming big and self-awareness will get you. I just love that. Well, it has been just a pleasure talking with you. And what can you tell us just overall, because you've seen a lot of change to the leadership structure of this team. You've seen it in the league around you, other leagues. What's just kind of your general professional opinion of change in these leagues?
I think if we're not changing, we're not growing. I think we struggle with that personally, right? I think oftentimes we maybe are creatures of habit. We kind of get stuck in the way in which we've always done it. We say we won't, but we do. So I think change is inevitable, and I think those that can lean into it and embrace it. And one of the things that I talk a lot about with my leadership team, do you wake up every day with a growth mindset? Is that something that you are even interested in having? And a growth mindset is being open to not just change, but growing and evolving as a professional, as a leader, as a friend, as a husband, as a person that serves inside of a community. It can mean whatever you want it to mean, but are you willing to take a growth mindset to work every single day? And sometimes maybe we get trapped into, but I got the vice president's job, or I do run my own organization, or I am an entrepreneur that's had huge amounts of success, or in my case, I am a CEO of this incredible organization, and there's only 30 of these. I mean, you could convince yourselves that,
to close things off.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm good. Or you could wake up every day and say, no, there's so much more I need to be. And in order to do that, there's a vulnerability to it. There's this approach I take often, which is I need to be more comfortable in the uncomfortable. I need to live in that and really embrace it and not be fearful of it. And there's a vulnerability that we don't have all the answers and that we're put in positions of leadership and we continue to have to make those tough decisions, some of which we've talked about a little bit earlier today around crisis, community, politics, team performance, change, ownership, transition, but embrace it and recognize that there's a vulnerability in maybe not having all the answers. I think the more vulnerable you are, actually, I think the more people want to be around that vulnerability. So that's how I would kind of describe change. Lean into it. If you're fearful of it, I think it's just going to be a really, really difficult way to kind of proceed. And I've listened to the files, if you will.
Yes. You're a crisis filer?
Yeah, I'm a crisis filer. And you've had some of the best leaders there are. And aren't we blessed to have those people here in our market?
Yes.
And in their own words, I think they describe it the same way. They never stop, not just goal setting, they never stop looking at the future and going, okay, can we go even beyond it? They're bold, they're visionary. But I think at the core, they're willing to be comfortable in the uncomfortable, and they're always seeking growth, a growth mindset kind of approach.
And it's so important. Well, very inspirational. Thank you, Ethan Casson, for an inside look at your own leadership journey and an insider's take on the country's and maybe even the world's most popular pro sport. Today's Crisis Brief is brought to you by Navigate Forward. Number 1, make every day count. The luckiest people are those who don't sit around but seize opportunities. Number 2, dream big. Number 3, embrace a growth mindset every day. Losing your job can feel like a crisis, but it's actually a great opportunity to reimagine the work that inspires you. If you're an executive who's ready for what's next, let Navigate Forward be your guide. Their career transition experts work exclusively with CEOs, VPs, and senior leaders around the United States, virtually or in person. Find out more at navigateforward.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Check out our website, thecrisisfiles.com. Catch up on all case files online. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.